Right, so today I want to talk a little bit more about Canada, and Canada's really headed down a dark path, and it seems like it's headed down an even darker and darker path by the day. I mean, we just had the conservative leadership race, and I mean, it wasn't good news. I mean, it could have been worse. You could end it came out of this with Mackay, and the conservatives would have went full on crazy, but under O'Toole, they're just going to go on, somewhat crazy. They're going to stay pretty much the same as where they did under Shear. I mean, Shear is actually even, I think, better in some ways, at least from the onset. But I think in the long run, it's looking like they're going to be worse. I mean, I know one of the first. I don't think it's confirmed yet, but it's looking like they're looking, at getting rid of Derek Sloan, which again, he was one of the last actual conservatives, it seems, in the Conservative Party, which only makes them look worse, and I think is only going to make things worse because, again, I really don't understand what the Conservatives' goal here is. I mean, I think they're probably just paid off. I mean, I think that they're just at this point they're just false opposition. It's all an act pretty much at this point in that there is no real opposition. I mean, there is some conservatives, to be fair, that are pushing back. I mean, Poilievre has done a pretty good job. Sloan, like um, Lewis maybe, but I don't know. I think that what's gonna have to happen is that Canada's gonna have to hit rock bottom. And what's going to have to happen for that? Well, things are going to have to continue to get worse and worse and worse. And the problem with that is that in the long run, it's probably better, but it's not really fair that a whole generation or maybe even two generations of people suffers mightily because of this kind of stuff. And I mean, I got a tweet pulled up here from Anthony Fury, and he says, "Here's Canada's new finance minister backing a book that calls for income taxes of up to 80% and an annual wealth tax of 2%." And again, the first thing to point out here is that California is proposing, I believe it's a 0.4% wealth tax, and that is something that is already just them proposing that is driving a lot of rich people out of the province. Um, Freeland thinks it's completely not out of the question to have a 2% wealth tax. And this is the thing, too. They probably won't go full on socialist off the start. I mean, again, you never go, these kind of massive changes to society, they never happen overnight. I mean, if you read if you watched the whole Yuri Bezmenov interview, I mean, that was in what the mid 80s. And there's stuff that he was talking about that's just kind of coming to pass now. So this kind of stuff happens over a generation or two, maybe even three. So they're not. I mean, they're not going to go. They're not going to go from where they're at right now to 80% marginal tax rates and a 2% wealth tax. My guess is that they'll start out at like 0.5 or something, comparable to where California is at. And what'll happen is rich people will just move out of Canada. They'll get the hell out of Canada as fast as they can, which will only make the problem worse. And this is the problem with raising taxes that the left just doesn't want to admit. And this is why they're wrong, is because they genuinely think that no matter how much tax they implement or no matter how much regulation they implement, people will just go along with it. Like no matter, it doesn't matter how they literally think that you can propose 90% marginal tax rates. Again, Bernie Sanders said, yeah, that's completely reasonable, and people are just going to go, and again, obviously they're not going to be 90% marginal tax rates on everyone, but Bernie Sanders wanted to raise taxes on anybody making above like $25,000 a year, I believe. So the idea of, oh, we're just going to tax the rich. No, Bernie Sanders wanted to raise taxes on pretty much anybody who works full time, even if it's a minimum wage job. I guess then minimum wage in the States is probably not quite that high, but anybody making more than like probably 17, 18 bucks an hour, yeah, your taxes are going up. And again, this idea, oh, we're only going to tax the rich. Well, no, the problem is that taxing people more doesn't work. I don't know how many times this needs to be said, but when you tax people more, what happens? And again, California and New York completely prove this. So when the left says, "Oh no, you're lying, it's all BS," no, California and New York are completely proving this because they're the states. I mean, California has the most taxes of any state. I'm rather sure about that. New York has very high. I mean, New York City has its own tax, right? Like I believe they're one of the only cities in North America that has its own income tax. So people are leaving these cities and these states in California and New York left, right, and center, and the reason why is because of the high taxes. And this is the thing too, that a lot of these people, they're not even conservatives. They're not even people who want lower taxes. I mean, look at Joe Rogan. He was all on the Bernie bandwagon, for pretty much the last 5 years. Um, but he's leaving, right? And this is the problem too, is that so many of these people don't actually believe what they believe, right? Like they want to pretend like they care about people and virtue signal, but when push actually comes to shove, all of a sudden high taxes doesn't work. It's like all these people that are socialists in high school and college, and all of a sudden they get out into the working world and they realize how much of their money is stolen by the government. And all of a sudden they're not socialists, right? So that's the problem, and this is the thing too. Though this is how Canada's headed, right? Like Canada has massive deficits. The government, if anything, only wants to increase spending. We are not going to cut spending anytime soon under a Liberal government, under an NDP government. That's not going to happen. Even under Conservative government, they're not going to cut spending either. I mean, they may cut a little, not spend it as much as the Liberals or the NDP want to spend, but they're still going to keep spending where it's at. Um, and that's the problem, is that the only way to pay for this kind of stuff is higher taxes. And that's the thing the government tends to do, is that the main goal is to implement policy X, and they know that there's no way they're going to convince the majority of the people to implement policy X. So what they do is that they implement a policy that will lead to policy X appearing like a good solution to the problems caused by the other policy they implemented. Thus, that then they turn around and implement the policy they wanted all along. And again, the policy that the government wants, at least this government, is pretty much socialism. And again, if they were flat out honest about it, they would never convince people about it. But if they do it step by step, well, all of a sudden it seems very palatable and like a good idea. So that's what's going to happen when it comes to this kind of stuff. And this is the problem too, that um, higher taxes, it does. I mean, when higher taxes are implemented, the people that are affected by those taxes, they tend to do one of, I guess, four things. But the most likely are, number one, they find ways to get around the taxes. Again, this is something that the left always complains about. Oh, people are tax cheats and they're all this kind of tax loopholes. Well, the problem is that um, there's always going to be loopholes. There's always going to be people who cheat. The solution is to not put them in the position to do it and make it like, hey, if we raise your tax, or sorry, if we lower your taxes a little bit, all of a sudden they may be like, hey, going about all this trouble to have to, store my money offshore in the Cayman Islands is kind of tough, and it could get me arrested. Maybe I'm just going to start paying taxes. But when your marginal tax rates are 80, 90%, of course they're going to try to do stuff like that. So again, when you raise taxes, people are just more and more likely to look for loopholes, or to just flat out not pay them, or to be, do fraudulent things. The other thing is that people just move, right? Like, I mean, California and New York are perfect examples of this. If taxes are raised too much, the rich will leave, because what do you know? People want to keep their own money. And the main reason why people want to raise taxes is because they are just selfish themselves. Again, it's selfish people accusing people of being selfish, right? Like, oh, the rich don't want to pay their fair share. But again, if they actually believe that, they would be like, hey, someone making $1 million a year pays X, the average person pays this. They would do that, right? But if they did that, they would be like, hey, someone making $1 million a year is probably paying what, half that, maybe a little bit more. You're looking at half, let's just say $500,000. Someone making a median income at 50K, 50, 60K, you're literally looking at what, probably pushing 20, 30 times more, probably even a little bit more taxes. So again, they would be like, hey, this person making $1 million a year is paying only 30 times more than the average person. They're so terrible. But if you put it in that way, it's like, hey, 30 times is a pretty good amount. Like, how do you not consider that a fair share, right? So that's why they never do that, because if they actually told people the actual amount that these people were paying, the average person would be like, hey, I think that's a pretty reasonable amount. It means way more than I'm paying. So again, that's the thing. And so that's the thing. But like I say, there's they just flat out move. They either try and avoid the tax, or I mean the other possible thing too is that they just pay the taxes, but you tax their wealth away, because that is the goal of a wealth tax. The goal of a wealth tax is to make it so nobody is actually rich, or at the very least the rich are less rich. But what happens when the rich are less rich? All of a sudden they at least some of them, are going to fall down tax brackets because they're no longer rich or as rich, right? So that just means you get less taxes out of them in the long run. And that's another one of the problems with these stupid socialist policies, is that a lot of times they work off the start. They work off the start, but because once they're implemented, people start moving, people start finding ways to cheat, and the people that don't do either one of those things just tend to just fall down tax brackets. Um, and then you end up with less than where you started. And that's the problem too, is they always come at it from an angle of, oh, nobody should have $1 billion in a bank account, which I don't think anybody has. Almost billionaires' assets are like 90+% tied up in either real estate or stocks, or it tends to be that kind of stuff. Like, it's almost exclusively the fact that they own very large amounts of shares of a company. I mean, you look at Jeff Bezos. I mean, you take someone like Donald Trump. He's a billionaire because he owns so much property. So again, nobody has $1 billion in a bank account. This is the thing that I've heard so many times from these idiot socialists, is that, oh, nobody needs $1 billion in a bank account. Well, nobody does have $1 billion in a bank account. I bet you these people don't even have 100 million in a bank account, let alone $1 billion. Maybe Jeff Bezos, but not the vast majority of bill. I mean, now the fact that his wife took so much of his, actually it'd be his stock, but I don't think that even Bezos would have that right now. And this is the other problem too. They bring up, oh, we'll just sell off a bunch of stock. Well, number one, that isn't feasible, because a lot of these people probably aren't allowed, legally even allowed, to sell that much stock, because it would make the price go way down. Like, if Jeff Bezos sold $1 billion of Amazon stock overnight, the price would go way down, because that's a very large amount of their stock. Um, if Trump sold $1 billion of his property, that would make the value of real estate in the area go down, because that's a ton of property, right? So the idea of this leftist utopia, I mean, there's so many, holes and contradictions that would make it not work whatsoever. It's just insane. And the problem that the left is trying to fix is a problem that they created, usually. Like, it's, oh, we have all these poor people, and they need resources. Well, if you want to fix the problem, create solutions that help build up the poor and make them be able to fend for themselves. Making them dependent upon government handouts is not going to fix the problem, but the left wants that, because if they're dependent upon the government, well, that's pretty much a guaranteed vote for them, right? So the goal of the politician that's proposing policies like this is, number one, to virtue signal. They want to appear like they actually, oh, we care about the poor, but in reality they don't. They want to be able to virtue signal. They want to be able to appear like they are virtuous when in reality they're not. And again, the reason why people do stuff like that, like virtue signaling, is that actually doing stuff that makes you look good actually requires a lot more effort than just virtue signaling. Throwing out a refugees welcome tweet is a lot easier than actually helping the refugees in said country, right? So that's why people like Trudeau do that kind of stuff. Um, the easier the easiest thing, the better. That's why they do that. So anyway, again, it's just something I kind of wanted to have a bit of a rant on, because there's so many just people that are just again, they're just completely ignorant. They have no idea whatsoever what they're talking about. It again, the reason why you know that these people are wrong is that if you ask them how much tax is too much, they probably won't give you a straight answer. And they probably won't give you a straight answer because they're what they actually believe is like 90-95% marginal tax rates, full on socialism, borderline communism. That's what a lot of these people want. And again, it doesn't matter what people call themselves too. I see people all the time that support stuff like this, and they say, "Oh, I'm not a socialist." Well, yeah, you are. Like again, if I proposed rounding up the Jews and putting them in concentration camps, but I didn't call myself a you know what, that still makes me a you know what. It doesn't matter what you call yourself. So this is the thing that really bothers me. So anyway, like I said, that's kind of the last thing I wanted to point out. But again, um, this is where we're at in Canada. Like this is where we're at in Canada. We have people literally pretty much at the top of government that support this kind of stuff, and by default it means we're going to end up with this kind of stuff, and it means we're going to end up with this kind of stuff. And again, people have to push back or we're going to end up with this. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. But if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on those other platforms, Twitter, BitChute, Parler. All those links are in the description, so make sure you follow me there if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more.